Okay, everyone, you're very welcome to this Dark Hedges Festival panel. We're talking about an introduction to horror. So my name is not Jim, as the screen may say. My name is Sean Kelly. I'm from Into Film. I'm joined by three other film fans with me today. So we've got Sarah, we've got Nichola, and we've got Neil. You just want to quickly introduce yourselves, guys?
Okay, I'll go first. Yeah. Hello, I'm Sarah from Film Hub NI, which is part of the BFI Film Audience Network. And our job is really to encourage audiences to engage with independent film in various cinema spaces and community cinemas across the place. So I'm personally a big fan of film, have worked in film for quite a while and been surrounded by it for a very, very long time.
Great stuff. Nichola?
Hi, I'm Nichola from Into Film, one of Sean's colleagues. I'm project coordinator on a project called Film for Learning, so working with schools across Belfast, Bristol and Bradford for using film and animation in the classroom. Big film fan, delighted to be here today chatting about films, especially scary films that are suitable for young people, because I feel that might be a speciality of mine. I can't get too scary.
Good stuff.
Hi, I'm Neil, and I am a bit of a film writer, blogger, reviewer type person. And I don't know why I'm here, because I'm gonna put my cap on this now. I'm the wuss of this group. I think horror is not really my thing at all.
Be so sure now. You haven't heard what I have to say yet.
But I'm a big scaredy cat, so I don't know where we're going to go here.
Okay.
But we'll see.
Okay. Well, if you get too scared, that's why we're doing this at lunchtime in the daylight.
I'll just turn the camera off.
Yeah. Okay. And I said, I'm Sean Kelly. I work for Into Film. In case you're not aware, Into Film is a UK-wide charity that supports film in education. So one of the parts of the job that Nick and I get involved in, which is great, is we get the opportunity to take kids out to film screenings all the time. So we're really envious position whereby we can be sitting in children's film festivals, just watching films alongside kids. So I think that's why we've been chosen, just to give a perspective, because we probably spend more time than is healthy in cinemas watching films with children and young people. We get to gauge the reaction. But the whole premise of this has come up, and it was in conversation with the Banterflix guys about how we could. You've obviously been enjoying the Dark Hedges Festival and all the content that's there, but no one really just arrives at a horror festival or a film festival engaging in dark stories completely unprepared. You already know that you're interested in that. So we were interested in, how do we get there? Because when you're 5 or 6, what's the journey that leads people towards horror as a genre or something that you're interested in? So that was the general premise. And with that in mind, the first question I wanted to ask is, if you just maybe describe the first time that you felt that sense of horror or being scared or frightened, whether in the cinema or watching a film at home. What was the first film that really just kicked in for you and scared you? So if you go, Neil, you're the scaredy cat. We'll go to you first.
Well, I went with very kind of childhood memories, and I kind of had, can I cheat and do 3?
Yep.
So I have scribbled down here. Gremlins was one.
Mm-hmm.
Gremlins gave me a bit of a fright, but then I also found myself just having a lot of fun watching all the chaos that unfolds with Gremlins.
Yep.
So that kind of was quite gentle. Ghostbusters was another one, which particularly the way it opened always kind of stuck with me. That kind of creeping around the bottom of a library or something.
Yeah, floating around the library. Yeah,
really, really creeped me out. And then the ultimate one that really scared me as a child, and the book scared me, and the film gave me the stuff of nightmares, was The Witches.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting. There's been a redoing of The Witches recently.
It's just like this week. Yeah.
Yeah, and the trailer was on, and my kids already were like, "Nope." the scariness of The Witches lives on.
Yeah.
So those are kind of my top 3.
Yeah, good stuff. Nichola?
I think top of my list would be Darby O'Gill. For many things in that film, the Banshee, the Coach de Bar,
the accents,
the dodgy accents. So yeah, probably Darby O'Gill be number 1. I do remember being afraid of The Witch and the Wizard of Oz, but these are films that I still love now.
Mm-hmm.
They never scared me enough that I stayed away from them. And I think for another one, I would pick Jason and the Argonauts.
Okay.
For many of Ray Harryhausen's creatures that he brought to the screen.
Mhm.
Probably the most scary for me was Talos, which was a big metal sculpture that came to life. He sort of guarded over a treasure trove, and someone goes in, steals something, and he comes to life and chases after them, and that was just terrifying to me, just the absolute size of it, and I suppose just the movement of Ray Harryhausen's creatures is terrifying, even
That
just on
means-
their own.
Yeah, it's the skeletons for me. In those Jason Argonaut films, the
Mhm.
skeletons are always terrifying. Okay. And Sarah?
Well, I kind of have two. Couldn't pick one as well. My first one is E.T. I was absolutely traumatized by E.T.
It's really
You know,
dark, E.T. You don't realise.
It's the scary dude, like hanging in your
Mhm.
in your closet or whatever, and big fingers and all. But it's with the bit when they take him when he's nearly dying, and the hazmat suits and all that.
Yeah.
I remember just being absolutely just terrified, and my parents loved it because they were like, they were quite young in the 80s, and I was a child, and they bought me this like wee sort of fake leather ET, and I was terrified of it, absolutely terrified. They still slag me about it now. And the other one that I know that Jim has done another one of these on was Ghost Watch. And I was about, I think, 11 or 12 when that came out, in a hotel room with my cousins. We'd all been shoved in a hotel room. My mum and my auntie were in the other room. And back in them days, you just watched whatever was on the 4 channels. You didn't know what was on.
Yeah.
So we'd put this on, or I think my cousin possibly knew about it and wanted to terrorize the rest of us. And we were so traumatized by pipes and all that stuff that we had to go and sleep on the floor in the other room with our parents in this hotel, because we were supposed to have this fun cousin night, but we were all completely and utterly traumatized. So that was awful. I still don't know if I'd be bothered watching it now, because it would just take me back to the dark place.
Yeah.
But it didn't put me off horror films. I actually worked in a video shop in the sort of late 90s, and started getting into like Japanese horror, like The Ring and Audition and all that stuff. It was really like hardcore stuff. So E.T. didn't really put me off that much.
Yeah.
You're the bravest person here.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. And for anyone who's under the age of 30 watching, a video shop is like Netflix, but if you put Netflix into Tesco's, that's kind of what a video shop was. But, okay, so, well, for me, it was there's a couple. Neil already mentioned Ghostbusters, but not for the reason that the ghosts in it were fine. I had no problem with the ghost, and there's a scary librarian. That's all fine. The Stay Puft Marshmallow Man at the end, for some reason, just even now I can't look at him. And my kids are like, "What? Him?" He's like, but that's the one that I just can't be doing. I've got, because I'm a big wuss as well. I've got a really long list of stuff, because it's and the my all-time scariest thing is the Child Catcher, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. This it's a lovely family film. It's great. You're like, it's not. It's kind of it's $4.99 for the DVD, and 50 quid an hour for the therapy that you need afterwards. No, that really terrified me when I was a kid. And even now, in that sense, it's coming up. Even though it'll be fine, you still get those kind of tingles. But that's the other thing I wanted to just quickly touch upon is we've got these perceptions that some films are, it's a lovely family film, and and then all of a sudden you put the film on and you're watching it, particularly if you're watching it with a younger audience, with kids or your nieces and nephews, and then, or Nicholas, in my case, sometimes in a whole cinema full of kids, you think, this will be fine. And then you realize, oh, actually, this is much, much darker than I remember. So it's, I'm thinking of films like some of the vintage Disney stuff, and Nicholas, it's particularly interest of yours, but some of those films get really dark and get really scary, and we just don't realize at the time. We think they're wonderful family films. Do you have any kind of thoughts on those?
Probably the earliest ones are the darkest, and I think probably because they're closest to maybe, that Victorian era where there is this interest in spiritualism, and there's an interest in teaching children through scary stories, and teaching morals through scary stories. And so with Snow White, the first one, the first big Disney feature film, the witch in that is absolutely terrifying. Not at first, because she's obviously portrayed as this beautiful, glamorous woman, but of course that's what leads her to do what she does. But I think scarier than that is Pinocchio for me. Pinocchio is, I think Pinocchio, the original story was written to sort of teach children not to do bad things. And even the Disney version, I think, is a gentler telling of it than the original story. I won't even read the original story because I know how dark it gets. I know there's things like, he gets chopped up for firewood and things.
Yeah.
I don't want to see that. And I know there's a new version of Pinocchio, which I don't want to see either, because I think they're truer to the original text.
The trailer of that was the trailer of the new one. I showed it to my
Yeah.
kids, and they were like, "I don't even have that near me. Please turn this off right now."
Yeah. But the Disney one, and it's considered to be one of the most beautiful Disney films of all time. And it's a stunning film. The detail in the animation is gorgeous, but it takes you to really dark places. Just even the fact that there's, two people approach him on the way to school to try and take him away somewhere. That's terrifying as a child. The fact that he gets taken away somewhere, the fact that, he goes to what is called Pleasure Island, which seems all fun and games, but then there's the darker side, and he gets sort of turned into a donkey.
Yeah, those sequences are terrifying for kids,
So I think as a child, I did really enjoy it, but it took me a long time to return to it. And when I did return to it, I realized as an adult, it's really terrifying, because there's a really terrible scene where towards the end, and hopefully everyone's seen it, and I'm not spoiling it for anyone, but there is a scene towards the end where Geppetto thinks he's lost Pinocchio, and he finds him in the water. And I can't really describe it any more than that, because it would get really upsetting. But it's just so dark, and it takes you places that I think a modern Disney film wouldn't take you to.
Yeah, because that's an interesting discussion, because horror films in general have been trying to aim younger and younger. A lot of the Blumhouse titles, just in terms of demographics, but even kids' films, the older ones are much scarier, much darker. So I think maybe it's what people are willing to tolerate. But even the likes of Toy Story, what's wrong in Toy? But they're really scary sequences in Toy Story. See when that doll comes out with it's the doll's head on the spider's legs and things. That's that, and the Barbie's legs with the fishing rod, all those stuff really, that's really creepy.
Yeah, even in like Frozen, the parents go off to sea and die in a really horrible shipwreck, and you think, well, it's Frozen, they're all princesses singing, but actually it's really dark. And I think it depends on the individual young person as well. I have two children. My son, who is very sensitive, we went to see Song of the Sea. Now he was about 5 in the cinema, and he was traumatized because the mum goes back to the sea in the end. And to him, that was just a horrible thing. But it's not overtly horror. It's not a jump scare. It's not anything like that. It's just, what way their wee minds kind of frame this stuff. Where the youngest one, she would, probably watch an autopsy and be absolutely fine.
But I think even with Frozen, the fact that the parents die, they do it just happens, and they brush by it, and it's dealt with in a nicer manner. I in preparation for this, I watched Snow White last night, and there's a scene with the huntsman, and he's actually holding a knife above Snow White's head, and that must be, well, as a child, I don't remember thinking that's particularly scary, but I wonder what my nieces and nephews would think of it now. But there's actually someone holding a knife over, Snow White's head, and then there's discussion of her heart being in a box, and then in Pinocchio, you see him lying in the water, upside down, and it's just, to me that's dark, and I don't know if we'd have that dark portrayal now of death or threat in a modern Disney. So I definitely think those earlier ones are the scariest.
Yeah, they can get away with a lot because they were just testing the water, and again, censorship was trying to tell, it's a kids' film, so there probably wasn't anything dark in it. But I know, Sarah, you mentioned Song of the Sea there. We were part of an interview panel with some of the guys from Curtin Saloon. It must have been last year at some point, and they were talking about when they're making the films and they're writing the stories and the scripts. I said even then they have to realize, so we're making this for kids. We forgot the tendency to. I think it's the same to lots of animated films. People making those are really interested in film. They're film buffs, and they really love it. So they try and squeeze in as many references, and but you can see lots of horror influences coming through in some kids' films, and even in something like E.T. you mentioned, Sarah. It's that the sequence where they're going out trick or treating on Halloween, and there's just Freddy Krueger and all of these other horror references that you see through the POV shot through the sheets. So there's loads of stuff. And Neil, do you find that same in when you're watching, say, modern kids films, or there was darker themes in them?
Just on the Disney thing, I remember 2 Disney events that really freaked me out. One was when I thought Baloo was dead at the end of Jungle Book as a child, the horror of that, and then Lady and the Tramp, of all things, there's a sequence where a rat comes into the bedroom to get the baby. And I just remember being in the cinema, and it's under like the cot, and it has these glowing eyes, and it just, like, even now it makes me kind of shudder a wee bit. It's just like the creepiness of that, and the kind of evil in this animal, that it was going to harm the baby type of thing. But the more modern stuff, yeah, Frozen was a big deal in our house when it came out, because I have two girls, and that moment where kind of the boat goes under, me and my wife just kind of turned and looked at each other and went, what have we brought our children to, you know, like, and it all ends well, and there's a lot of singing, and the soundtrack was in my car forever. But Disney does that a wee bit with parents.
They kill them off, left, right, and center.
Yeah.
There's a bit of trauma in there that, but I had a friend, interestingly, who they went to see Paddington, of all things, when it came out at first, and they lasted half an hour, or maybe it was Paddington 2. There was a bit where Paddington becomes separated from his family early on, and there's like a big storm or something like that, and their kids were done. They were like, this is horror, this is terrible, he's lost, this is like a child's nightmare. And like, Paddington is an incredibly heartwarming, warm hug of a film in general, but that kind of opening bit just did my friend's kids, and they were done after half an hour, to the point where now I don't even think they've really got over that. I took my daughter to see Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, the Gene Wilder Charlie and the Chocolate Factory in the Strand, and the lady who played Veruca Salt was there, and you get to that bit in the boat.
Yeah, that's terrifying.
In that Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and I had forgotten all about that, and that whole sequence started, and I was like, oh my goodness, are we going to be okay here? Because I don't know if I'm okay right now. I don't feel okay. I feel a bit like tense and anxious, and that sequence kind of slips into the middle of something which there's not really any great horror in. That sequence gets very, very dark very, very quickly. Yeah,
because we would get that a lot, particularly we're screening films for, into film parts of the festivals, we're out and about the schools, and you think, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, what could go wrong? And teachers and parents are signing up, permission slips left, right, and center, and then all of a sudden you realize, just for that 2 or 3 minute sequence, you're like, I don't remember this, but it's just like they're part of the brain is just either blocked it out, or I thought, oh, that's a lovely hug of a film. It's it's going to be great. So and I suppose what I think is really interesting is it's how kids react in that moment. So they have, as you say, Sarah, some of the kids will be terrified of that's that and done, I can't watch it again, where other kids find it exciting or exhilarating. And I think that's probably where it starts for lots of people. You get that rush of excitement, and the relief that comes afterwards, because it's going to be okay, or that Baloo hasn't died. But it's just that just playing with your emotions essentially. But I think depending on how you react to that, then if you enjoy that experience, then maybe you go and seek out more, or you're more tolerant of other stuff. So I think that's quite interesting, because my kids are a bit older, but a few years ago I sat them down, about this time of year, I sat them down to watch Gremlins, again thinking, 80s classic, this will be fine. I was like, halfway through, I was like, I shouldn't, even the rating, no, it's PG. I was double checked again this morning. Gremlins should not be a PG.
No, even the bit where she's talking about the chimney.
Yeah, that's really breaking down.
That's a child thing.
Honestly, that's how one of my kids found out there was no Santa. She's like, because you think, but you don't. You just say Gremlins, it's fine. It's a Halloweeny, jump scares, and then there's those. Oh, it's just completely inappropriate for anyone to get under 12 or 13, I would say. But and that heartbreaking story. Incidentally, Santa's, there's no Santa. He's broken his neck and he's stuck in a chimney. It's terrible. There's so much of that stuff that you just forget that it's that it's there.
And horror is really subjective as well. It's like, what is the scariest thing for a child? Is it finding out that Santa is not real? Is it losing a parent? Are you afraid of spiders? Then arachnophobia would be your worst horror film. You're afraid of sharks? Then it's Jaws. I suppose it's what it's tapping into your own fears. So some horror films you could watch and some you couldn't, depending on who you are as a person.
Yeah,
like how the ratings change as well, how the BBFC ratings have changed over the years about. I mean, I watched Ghostbusters a couple of years ago, and there's no way I'm showing it, but it's more like there's a lot of adult content that as well, and I think it's a PG. It's less of the horror stuff, more of the other stuff, that wouldn't be in a PG now. So obviously that's evolved and had an influence on what the ratings are and what people can access, I suppose.
Yeah. And
I think in the 80s a lot got into the PG movies.
Yeah.
They got away with a lot.
They did get away with an awful lot, because that was before they brought in the PG-13 or the 12A, as we have a lot of that. And that was, I think it was brought in just after Gremlins, because it was the same year. Gremlins came out in the year, and I think it was Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. You know, just for moving slightly old, like Indiana Jones, you think, oh, that's going to be fine. But if people get their faces melted off, and there's people get their heart ripped out of their chest, and it's proper, so they're holding up a beating heart and the blood dripping from it, and you think, this is not the family film that I remembered. This is, it's going to be a lovely Saturday afternoon movie.
Ghost was one of the first, I think, 12s as well. So I remember going to see it in the Curzon, and my mum took me, and she had to lie to the woman because I was like 10 or whatever. I had to lie to the wee woman, like, she's not 12, like she is. And that was, I remember there was a big deal that was one of the first big. It wasn't really that scary from what I remember.
Well, it's scary for the wrong reasons, maybe. But yeah, it's interesting just how how time has evolved to take those things into account, because it's but we had delivered maybe again about a year and a half ago. With all this COVID stuff, it's hard to keep track of was it 2020 or was it 10 years ago?
Yeah.
But we had a screening in the Cinemobile, the mobile cinema, and we thought, okay, the Goonies. We thought this will be fine. Another 80s classic. It's going to be, and 5 minutes in, it's like, this is a PG, and everyone signed off it, but I don't remember these references in the language in some of those films. And again, there's a really scary part to that as well. But you just assume. I don't know if it's after you watch them, you just block it out, and you just you take those bits out and you package it up as a lovely family film, or it's just a bit of fun. So I think that's interesting.
The Goonies is available on I can't remember. It's available on one of the streaming services at the minute. And my kids asked me about it because it says on it, it gives the rating as PG, but it says on it something on the screen before you hit play, like the views expressed in this film are reflective of the period in which it was made, or something like that. And it was the first time I've ever seen anything like that, and it's to do with that, the language and the all the stuff in there kind of, and very early on, like you said, like it's interesting that has now, we're not going to shift the kind of certificate on this, but you need to be aware that this was made at this point, and we all felt that it was okay to talk to each other this way.
Because I think there's a reference to cocaine in the first 3 or 4 minutes. Again, and then it's interesting because Interfilm, we have this catalogue of over 3,000 films that we make available to schools the whole way across the UK, but we've got a curation team who watch everything, and again, they will have any of the films there will have the BBFC rating, but then they'll also have a recommendation beside it and a teacher's warning if there is some content. But again, it's sometimes in films you just don't expect them to go to dark places, and they do. So, Sarah, do you enjoy that experience of being scared?
Yeah, I think I watched it recently, and it was like terrible, but actually there was bits of it that were really scary, and I had nightmares for the first time in a long time. But I kind of like I like psychologically frightening stuff. More the hole in the ground, the Irish film came out a couple of years ago. Did you see that with Shauna Crusake? That was pretty good because it was just kind of really kind of underlyingly creepy, and then that kind of thing. So yeah, I still like that sort of thing. I wouldn't actively go out and seek the big horror films or anything like that, but it'd be more kind of the although there was one film nearly put me off the whole genre. In fact, nearly put me off films altogether, was Wolf Creek, the Australian film.
Yeah.
With about the backpackers getting murdered. Oh my God. I actually had to watch the last like half hour of it. I think it was on VCR, maybe or DVD. It must have been DVD. And I actually watched it on fast forward just to see what would happen. But I hear the noises of people getting like stabbed in the Yes. And I think they made a sequel, and I was like, absolutely no way will I watch it. So I nearly did stop watching them, but no, I do like it now.
Yeah, but I think it's interesting. Do you enjoy that experience of being frightened or being scared?
Yeah. Not much else to do these days.
Just watch the news. That's all you need.
Yeah, just watch the news. But yeah, when stuff that frightens me is like real stuff as opposed to
Yeah.
creatures and monsters or anything. And I do, I mean, I get very stressed. I mean, even Stranger Things stresses me out in time, you know. But yeah, I do.
Yeah.
do enjoy
Okay. And Neil, do you like the experience of being scared?
No.
No.
No, not really.
No. Frozen's your limit.
I don't like that. Particularly in like a communal cinema setting where the whole room jumps.
Mm-hmm.
I'm on edge from like minute one in that scenario. If I know, I think sometimes I anticipate it more than the thing in front of me is actually scary. And the things I find scarier are like the real, like Sarah saying, the reality of something. So I had watched something for Jim there a while ago, Rose, a love story, and it's kind of got this horror edge to it. But there's a sequence where a girl gets her leg caught in a bear trap, and I find that scary because in my head I was like, that could actually happen. The kind of the gore of that and the sight of that kind of in the leg type of thing kind of freaked me out more than anything with the kind of vampire edge of the story that is in there, because my rational brain goes, oh, that's not real. But bear traps are real. Walking along and getting your leg stuck in a bear trap could be a real thing that happens, and that kind of
park.
And it happens all the time around here. Lily Dixon's is littered with them. It's a weird thing. So like I could watch in terms of like the violence and the gore. So like a Tarantino, like in Kill Bill, doesn't fizz on me at all. But if you said to me, do you want to watch this documentary about like surgical procedures in a hospital? Absolutely not, because that's gross and that could happen. I can't cope with the same. Something in my brain just kind of goes, that's real, that's fake. The fake stuff you can put away in a box and that's fine. And the real things are just too much, and I'm like that. No.
It's like the lady walking up the stairs in A Quiet Place. Do you know that's like that's proper horror. You know, because that could happen in my own house. But and Nichola, do you enjoy the experience of actually being?
Yeah, and I think I'm really brave at the time when I'm watching the film, even though I kind of like, cover my eyes and maybe have to pause or fast forward. But the real test of bravery comes the weeks after you've watched it, and that thought is still with you, and you're in the house alone and you're looking over your shoulder at things. To me, that's the test of bravery. Can you really stand a horror film? Like today I was looking up some horror films, and I was looking up the older It. Sarah mentioned, I think it was the newer It you've been watching. So I was looking up, the older one is the one that I love, although it's not a film, it's a TV miniseries. But just on the right hand side there was just all the little pictures of Tim Curry as Pennywise, and I was staring at them and just staring just to make sure none of them were going to move, because that's what would happen in the film. So that's still, like, I remember even when I was younger walking a couple of streets from my friend's house at night and having to walk down the middle of the road to be away from like the drains and the gratings, even though they're completely different from the American storm drains or whatever, just because it stayed with me afterwards. To me, that's a sign of a good horror film. Paranormal Activity has done that for me in the loft.
Well, I had the same experience. I had that walking home experience after Ghostbusters, because again it was foggy and there wasn't a bit of a foggy, wet, just a genuinely creepy night, but it was just no fear of ghosts. It was just this giant 45-foot marshmallow was going to come after me. Couldn't go to a sweet shop for weeks. But but what I was thinking, because again now I've got 2 teenage boys and they're starting to show some sort of interest, and as you say, the gore and that kind of things doesn't seem to bother them, but they're interested in having this list of films almost as a badge of honor to say, oh yeah, I watched that, I got through that, I was really good. And so I think for some, maybe it is just for younger boys, it's this idea of, oh yeah, I've watched The Exorcist, or I've watched Halloween, or I've watched, checking them off. It's a macho thing. I didn't cry at this and I didn't get scared at that.
I told a lot of lies in primary school about A Nightmare on Elm Street. Because that was kind of our equivalent back then. I was like loads of my mates in primary school, and like we were what, I don't know, P5, P6, and my mates going, oh, we saw the Freddy film and da 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 da, and I was like, oh yeah, I've seen that. Yeah. I was like, nope, not a mission of me ever getting that, or me getting it over the door of my house.
Yeah.
But I told lies to kind of get that kind of get the cool points.
Yeah, well, you have to. As boys in primary school, you have to. Yeah, but it's amazing now. I think in terms of what we got away with watching. And again, back in that video shop, you could go and just, and if you knew the person in the video shop, you got, or if there was a really sadistic person in the video shop that encouraged you to get something, just so you come back traumatized the next day. But it's the same for you, Sarah, in terms of that. Do you think you said like, oh, I watched it? It's like a wee badge of honor. It's like, yeah, I've watched that. I can handle that.
Yeah, well, it was more any film that was over the age. If you were 10 and you watched the 12, it didn't matter what it was. That was kind of what it was. But I didn't really have that because I didn't know any other teenage girls who would have been into film as much as I was in general, who, would have been first at the cinema to see Trainspotting and Pulp Fiction and on all that stuff. So I didn't really have that. It was sort of in my own mental, tick list of reading whatever Empire, whatever magazine it was. Oh, want to see that one? Can I get that from the video shop?
Because that would have been your only source of content at the time. Because again, it's and I think, and most of the video shops when I was growing up, it was all it would just be the main blockbusters, but then it would have been the whole horror section would have been a big section because it was there's so many of them made because they're a cheap enough production in general. You can you get lots of cheaper, maybe not great horror films, but there's lots of them. Yeah. So do you think maybe at the minute then kids have got access to so many different platforms and so much streaming? It's I'm something in 10 years time will not be just as many horror fans because kids are I'm more interested in this type of film, but they got access to more content so they can go in more directions.
I think gaming maybe has some sort of influence on that as well because my son's obsessed with Fortnite, it's the bane of our existence, but they're kind of they're framed as kid friendly, but they are kind of, the concept of them is all chasing and killing people and stuff, so they're probably exposed a bit more if they're into games in that way. That is maybe a bit more of a gateway into films, or there's a linkage, and there's a lot more. It's probably, I'm very cynical, but there's merchandise and all that stuff. It's just more easy access, and they're more aware of things now than back in our day when everything was black and white.
Yeah, but even that, like some games are genuinely they're masterpieces in terms of artwork and production wise. But the Last of Us, which is not like necessarily a horror game, but it's a zombie apocalypse game, but that's got some really, really scary moments in it. And I remember playing the first Resident Evil. I think it's just that because you're the one that has to open the door. It's just this door, it's slowly opening, but it gets very simple kind of jump scares. But the films never somehow seem to capture.
Yeah,
it's just that sentiment, as you say, Nichola, reading you can watch Pinocchio, but you're not reading the book because that's going to be much, much darker. And then because there's always then if we move away from the kind of the primary and the family films into the kind of that early teen kind of or young adult, as lots of people call it, there seems to be a bit of a move now to try and focus to all dystopian and think of things primarily like the Hunger Games, and then from that, because the Hunger Games, again, very successful franchise, and it seems fine, but that's another really, really dark premise of a film. And if you're as a parent, or if you speak to kids, say, oh yeah, I'm just going to watch the Hunger Games, people think fine. If you say, I'm going to watch a film about 50 kids, they're all put on an island and they all have to kill each other and chop each other up, and whichever one's the last left is the winner. It's it's a slightly different sell, but I don't know if that's just been marketed differently. But or even has anyone seen Battle Royale?
Yeah.
So
the original one, yeah.
So which is kind of that is and again that's much darker than Hunger Games, but it's that idea of the premise of that is shocking, but somehow if we package it up and make it a mainstream film, it's not a horror film anymore; it's an action film. So, is there any of the other kind of that younger adult stuff that you've seen and think, "Go, that's a bit," because touching on some stuff.
I've really seen a lot of those things, so maybe. Somebody else might be more qualified to answer those.
I suppose like the Harry Potter films, as they progress, get darker and darker, and the threat becomes more real, and characters do actually start to die. So in the same way, in the Hunger Games, it's not like this. Oh, there's this threat that never actually, no one ever follows through with. Yeah. We do actually lose characters, and it's the same, I suppose, with Harry Potter. But I think you have to be willing to go further in. I know some people are put off by some of the earlier Harry Potters because they're aimed at a younger audience. But I suppose they were designed for an audience to grow up with them and then start to, be able to take on things like losing characters and, really bad things happening, and torture. I mean, there's a lot of torture in the Harry Potter films. The character Bellatrix Lestrange, I mean, she's probably one of the most terrifying characters in that, in the books and in the films.
Yeah, but I guess that I suppose you say, because it's Harry Potter is interesting because it, as you say, it follows the audience through. It's designed to grow up with the audience at the beginning. It's bigger monsters. Dogs with 3 heads. It's the bigger kind of more comedy monsters, but then it does get much darker and gets more intimate. It's more personalized and it's not as over the top. It's more kind of nuanced and simplified. But again, I think it does all depend on how kids react to that kind of stuff. But I wanted to play a quick game with you because this is something that we were talking about last night. So just imagine, do you know Blumhouse Productions? So they make they're very successful at the minute. So they're kind of, they give lots of directorial freedom. They do stuff on a much smaller budget than normal. So say it's 5-6 million. They'll give a director the money and then they go do that. But if you could imagine, if you could take like a kids film or a family film, but you can't change the script. So you've just got the script of a standard kids film, but you go into a horror company to say, okay, we're going to make this. We're not going to change anything, but we'll, maybe the music, add a few scenes here and there. It's not a massive shift to take a standard kids film and then turn it into something that's really, really dark. So what would you, if you were pitching something, Sarah, what would you pitch?
My favorite Disney film of all time has some quite dark moments, and it is a modern one, and it's maybe a bit controversial. Zootropolis.
Okay.
There's dark moments in
There is dark
Zootropolis,
moments, yeah.
like the predators against the thing. So I'd love to say that would be cool.
Okay, that would be good. That'd be good. Yeah. Neil and Nichola?
You've thrown me for a loop with this one. I think one of the things that I would kind of ramp up the kind of, I think the way to do it is to ramp it up with it is Jurassic Park. So there's
it doesn't need much ramping up, in my opinion. That's
no, but there's a lot of suggested, but I think I would gore up Jurassic Park a wee bit more.
Okay.
Because that sequence where the guy gets eaten on the toilet is kind of just very clean cut and almost funny, and it makes a lot of kids laugh. Yeah. I would kind of gore up a few wee bits and stuff like that, and that kitchen sequence, that can get quite scary and stuff. We could maybe, I don't know, do something to the raptors to make them even more terrifying or something like that.
But because because it's the kitchen sequence and then just the glass, just the shaking of the glass. It's that for lots of really successful stuff. It's not what you see. It's what your imagination is more terrifying than anything the filmmakers can come up with. So okay, that's a good shout, Nichola.
The one that popped into my head was Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. So you have this dad who's like a mad scientist. As much as I love Rick Moranis, you could totally twist that film and make it even darker. And just the fact that they're out lost and they're tiny. I mean, there's definitely more things I think could happen to them in that garden if you want to add something to it.
Yeah, I wouldn't think much work because I had been thinking, because I was cheating. I didn't tell you this in advance, but just so I thought maybe then I could win. But because I was thinking Home Alone. So if you imagine just going to pitch homeless, there's a kid who's been abandoned by his parents, and he's living with a potential axe murderer next door, and there's 2 guys trying to break in, and he has to, he's trying to kill them or chop them up. It's like that's. You put an 18 rating on that and a bit of gore. It's not, it's exactly the same story. It's just presented in a slightly different way. But we roll out at Christmas every year thinking, come on, watch this, kids. It's fine. There's machine guns in it, but it's very festive. It's that.
Again, in keeping with my thing of things that are real are more terrifying than anything kind of ridiculous. That bit where he puts his foot through the nail on the stairs.
That's what I was thinking of.
Every time. I'm like,
I scream.
Yeah. And even it's coming. That's the thing. You've watched it so many times, it's coming. But then you still go back. It's that release. I think it's that the excitement and the build, and then just that release. Okay, it's over now. It's fine, and then you just cringe for 5 minutes.
It's Daniel Stern's scream.
Yeah,
but he screams so well. Be nothing without sound effects.
Yeah, but then I think for lots of those, if you start taking that stuff out, we've mentioned things like Gremlins, for example. If you go back in Gremlins and try to, let's take the scary stuff out. The whole premise of the film, the whole thing, it's lost to you. I think you need those scary bits, but I do find it's interesting that when you think back, that's not the bits that you remember. You're terrified at the time, but the overall film, that's not how it's perceived. apart from maybe Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, because you speak to lots of people and they're like, that's not happening. Would you think that would be the case for lots of films? You do need kids enjoy that, albeit 2 or 3 minutes of an hour and a half. They do enjoy the process of feeling scared.
I think so. I think children's attitude has changed to scary characters as well. So you're talking about like the character from Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, the child catcher. But I think even the fact now that Disney sort of markets their villains. Like I have 2 little nieces who love the villains as much as they love the princesses. So I think they definitely nowadays they do like to sort of dabble a bit with the dark side of the characters. Like Ursula, Maleficent's got her own films. Yeah. There's definitely something there. I can't imagine me being a child in the 80s being as interested in the bad characters. Although I always loved Wile E. Coyote. Always hoped he would catch Roadrunner. But yeah.
The gore scene as he's eating them.
Yeah. I've never seen it, so maybe you could pitch that. That'd be a good pitch actually for take that to dark places. So I think attitudes have changed a bit.
Yeah,
it's like the scare.
Yeah, it is interesting when filmmakers go back to revisit the villains or the baddies in a piece. They tend to just soften the edges of them. They don't go. So if you think of Darth Vader, who's for a long time considered to be the scariest person in films, but you go back and make the prequels, regardless of how you feel about them, they just take that edge off them. They make them more sympathetic characters, and then that somehow it makes them less scary on the whole because you can feel sorry for them. But they've done that to an extent with Maleficent as well in those films. They've just taken, so there's something definitely to be said for just leave the baddie as the baddie. You don't need to have.
You don't need to know why they're so bad. Just leave them bad.
Yeah, just keep them bad. Yeah, because it's I think that's it. Yeah, there's enough baddies we've got all the details for in real life. We just keep some things, and I think that's why kids are drawn to lots of other films as well. It's the fear of the unknown. What you don't know is probably scarier than finding out the whole backstory. Oh, they did this because A, B, and C. So the fact that you just don't know that all of a sudden they've appeared and they're bad. But I know we're coming up on time soon, but we were looking at there's another film we've screened for children in the past, and it's very popular this time of year on DVD, and it's Coraline. Have any of you seen that?
I think a while ago, I can't quite remember.
The Latka one, because there's that stop motion animation, like the Coraline and the Tim Burton ones, so Corpse Bride and Frankenweenie, and a lot of them deliberately reference, particularly in Tim Burton's stuff, deliberately references Hammer horror and Vincent Price and all of that kind of stuff is coming through. So I think for some kids, there's a lot of joy to be found in those because they know it's not going to be too bad. As was the Nightmare Before Christmas is another one. So kind of we've got that 8-week window where the Nightmare Before Christmas is the perfect film to watch with kids. But, and do you think there's you obviously get away with a lot more in animation, but is it less scary if it's animated?
I think so. Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Because again, it seems like, as you say, it's that it takes the real world aspect out of it. It seems a bit more.
Unless we're talking Ray Harryhausen, because he has a way of animating creatures and their movement there's just something very creepy and unsettling about the movement of some of his. To me, that's the only animation that would probably scare me.
And interesting, that's older animation as well. That's obviously.
And it's older.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's just a style thing, because I don't know if I see that in a lot of other stop motion animation, that just the body movements, how the shoulders are always sort of pushed back and I don't know, there's something sinister about it.
And then that Monster House, which at the Hub we did a screening of a couple of years ago when I brought my son and we had to leave. And he was just like, the house is the scary character.
Yeah.
He won't even, it's on Netflix now. And I'm like, oh, do you want to watch this? So the sister's been watching it. He's like, no, I can't. Just something about if kids get something they latch on to that's terrifying for them, that's just it. And they will never watch it again,
Yeah, I'm the same. Don't worry. It's kind of, and then I think that's, would you find yourself going back to film because particularly this time of year, it's like, okay, it's Halloween, we're going to put something scary on. Is there like a go-to Halloween film that you would watch?
Weirdly, we always watch Casper the Friendly Ghost at Christmas. I don't know why, because it is. I don't know why, but we love watching Casper, which is kind of a cute ghosty film.
Yeah.
Which we should probably watch now, but for some reason, maybe it's just always on ITV or something.
Yeah, you tape it at Halloween and then you have it saved for Christmas.
Yeah,
I watched it last week for the first time in a long time and was surprised that Dan Aykroyd appears in his Ghostbuster outfit in it. I was like, oh, I do not remember that. It was a nice surprise.
Yeah. But the Tim Burton ones we've been watching Corpse Bride and Nightmare Before Christmas the last couple of days.
Yeah, so I love Corpse Bride. It's really good, and Frankenweenie as well. I think it's really good. It's interesting because Tim Burton obviously started off as a Disney animator, so and he left it because he couldn't get to do any of the dark, interesting stories. I know he's obviously back working for Disney, but I think when you look back at the previous Disney catalog, there's much darker than Tim Burton in there. I just don't think it'll get through the censors at the same time now. But and then it's the last thing that I was thinking about is that Guys at Banterflix asks is if we were going to put kids in a room and give them a film to watch to try and not traumatize them, but to try and scare them. If you're like, okay, kids, this is a really good film. There are some scary bits in it, and if you like some scary films, then don't worry, we've got hundreds and hundreds more to kind of really think about. So, if you could just think of a film if you're putting on for some kids that you would like to introduce into the whole idea of being scared by a film.
Well, Neil's already mentioned it, but I think The Witches is pretty, because most of them will have been introduced to Roald Dahl at school, and that they'll know that he's this author, and with these stories. And I mean, The Witches is brilliant. It is really, maybe it's too scary when they take all it's the wigs.
Yeah, it's that David Cronenberg
off of the
but I mean, it'd be funny to stand at the back and watch them.
But again, that's what we identify. That's what we do. Because like, okay, here's the bit. You can feel that just tension. You've got 300 kids watching a film. You think, okay, here's the bit. Or even if you just stand at the door, come and then we've had you see then there's always 3 or 4 kids that will come out. That just need to speak to the teacher or something at the end. They just need a toilet break at that exact moment. So funny, we had a screening. It wasn't that long ago of The Biggest Little Farm.
Oh yeah.
Seen the documentary about being a couple in America being self-sufficient, so they try and set up a farm and be completely self-sufficient. But it's a documentary, halfway through, there's some characters that are animals, but inevitably the animals are there for a reason. So it comes kind of it's coming close to Christmas, and some of the animals have to kind of take a wee trip somewhere. But the so many children come out of those screenings, just really upset. Think that it's too scary. It's too scary because and there's nothing in it. It's just that idea. That, but again, it comes back to the point that it's real life. So they think they've made an attachment with this pig or this turkey, and they have they really traumatized. But we can usually gauge how well a film's playing by how many toilet breaks there are.
How many vegetarians are at the end?
How many upset children. And so, Nichola, in terms of a film you would encourage kids to watch?
Are we talking primary children?
Yeah. Well.
I think Chitty Chitty Bang Bang's a really good one. Although it's a very long film. I actually, I think maybe it is sort of something that you have to show in the cinema. I think if you showed it at home, kids don't have the time, the patience now for longer films. Darby O'Gill, and also Bedknobs and Broomsticks. I don't know about you guys, but when all the objects come to life at the end, that scared me when I was a kid. And I think it kind of put me off museums a bit for a while. But just when everything comes to life, that I find that quite frightening.
Yeah.
And of course she's a witch in it as well, so there's definitely got some spooky elements to it.
That's funny. My memory of Bedknobs, and I haven't seen it in years, but it doesn't strike me as it's trying to be Mary Poppins, but it's just not as good. But I can't remember any of the scary bits. So
it's so different from Mary Poppins. It's not like that at all. I went to see it in the Strand must have been just a couple months before lockdown with my family, and I was surprised at how good it still was. It's such a good film, very entertaining. Still a wee bit scary, but my nieces weren't scared.
Neil, if you're trying to terrify your children, what would you put on?
Yeah, I think one that has already been mentioned as well, Wizard of Oz, and in particular just anything around those flipping winged monkeys.
Oh yeah. I have that written down here. It's just a big X beside it.
They are particularly scary. And the Witches, as I've said, I'm quite intrigued to see if that new Witches is as scarring as that kind of version from my younger days is, or whether they've toned it down in any way, shape, or form. Wizard of Oz gets even that thing of just being swept away from family and stuff again.
Yeah. Yeah, and the first thing you do when you get there is you kill someone. You just there's a murder straight off the bat.
Yeah.
Like, so it's
very dark. Like
it's just before you even start, before you go to
there's a guy running around with no brain, no heart. You know, it's not.
So, well,
it's
not
not
no politics, no politics. But it's I think it's. But just to go back to the witches point, I think it'll be interesting to see just how that plays, because I think, obviously, I'm sure the prosthetics in the first one are great. I don't know in this new one if it's CG or if it's again prosthetics, but I think, Nichola, to your point about Harryhausen, I think that that realness of it, because it feels like someone has moved that around and it's got that kind of.
It feels like it's physically there with the actor.
And I think that's something you lose with CGI. You know, like some of the animations, it's too smooth or it's too slick, so it doesn't seem real. But I think it'd be interesting to see if that would have the same effect on young people. Okay. So, but that's but listen, folks, I think we're pretty much coming up on time. So we agreed that you kind of horror film starts. You love if horror film starts kind of, or interested in it at least, can start quite early on.
Mm-hmm.
Depending on whether or not you've been, what access you've had to the video shop, or how sort of concerned your parents are about film ratings. You get access to some stuff when you're younger, but, and it's whether it's a badge of honor or not. I don't know about you, but I've also found, particularly if you're talking to horror fans tend to be some of the biggest fans across all genres. They just really enjoy film, whereas it's almost if you've started at the beginning, kids animation, you've gone the whole way through most of all the genres, and you find yourself at horror, and you really enjoy that. Whereas it's not the place you start, so it's almost a place you graduate to. So I think that's quite interesting. And have you found that in your experience as well, Sarah? I know with the hubs, there've been lots of venues when they were in a position where they could screen films, particularly around this time. But it tends to be those people who really engage in film that like horror.
Yeah, there's quite a good. I can tell you a very funny story very quickly about Newcastle Community Cinema a few years ago had a screening of the Blair Witch Project and I think they did it outdoors in the forest. But what they got everybody to do was come and sit on a bus, and then they'd get taken to somewhere they didn't know. But they'd get a blindfold. That's what it was. They were going to blindfold everybody and take them.
Nicholas' face already.
No.
I'm
out.
Was they couldn't find whatever had happened. There'd been a miscommunication. Somebody hadn't either brought the blindfolds or they couldn't get something. So they ran over to the local chicken shop and got these paper chicken bags. There was like 30 people on this bus, and they got driven around the same mile circle for about like 30 times or something, and then taken to watch this film in the forest. And they had so much fun with it. And I think that was just, a cinema like Newcastle Community Cinema has all sorts of people down there, and it was just like film fans had gone to do that. You can I think horror is something that you can really work with in terms of kind of enhanced screenings.
Yeah, you really can.
Like
just that image, as you say, those 30 people sitting in the forest with bags of chicken on their head. It's
hilarious, absolutely. You should get them to tell that story. They tell a lot better than me. I was crying with laughter when they were telling me that. But anything that we've done, that we've Cinema Day that we run every year, not this year, but which is kind of go across Northern Ireland. Any horror stuff has gone really well. No, Jim has done a few. And again, it just adds to the whole people are into to all of it,
Yeah, I think that's the thing. It is people you don't appreciate it. It is just for fun. It's not for any kind of it's not being sadistic, being interested in gore. If people just enjoy the experience. So for some people, being scared is fun. That's kind of. You all agree? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it depends. Obviously, it depends. Frozen, I know, can be quite dark in places, but it depends on your level and kind of where you have to stop. But
see the fingers like that.
Yeah, behind because the last film I had down here actually, we're not going to have time to talk about it, but it's Watership Down.
Oh
yeah.
Because it's like, and they remade that again recently, and it lost all of the kind of it just wasn't. But that original animation, if you really want to freak kids out, just put it in front of that, because it's got everything in there. So.
That was something that like ITV would have put on like 2:00 on a Saturday afternoon. And my mum and dad would went, here, go and watch that wee film about rabbits.
Yeah. Rabbits and Nazis and torture and death. Yeah, it's kind of, but it's funny. It's just that if it depends how it's packaged, but if the cover of Watership Down needs to be changed, just showing Nazi rabbits and things. It's not. you'd say, oh yes,
That's what we should show as our thing to scare kids. Watership Down.
Watership Down.
Yeah.
Okay, no problem. Well, on that Watership Down recommendation, maybe we'll take that to Blumhouse to get here 5 or 6 million to do the gore version, just rabbits with chainsaws. But listen, folks, thanks very much. And I think for anyone who's stayed with us this long, thank you for sticking around. And I hope you enjoy not just this panel, but everything else that Jim and the guys at Banterflix put together for the Dark Hedges Festival. So thanks very much, folks. And we'll see you all again, hopefully, fingers crossed, in the cinema very soon. Okay. Thanks for your time, guys.
That was a lot of fun.
Cheers, guys.
Bye.